Gathered for you tonight are an assortment of stories on strange sightings. 2 involving mimics, 1 about a dogman, and another is a run-in with Bigfoot. These are first-hand accounts of cryptid encounters. I grew up at my grandparents' place in eastern Kentucky, about 40 minutes outside Pikeville. My parents worked late most nights, so from age 12 to 16, I'd head there after school and stay until they picked me up around 9 or 10. The property was maybe 30 acres, mostly woods, with the house, a detached garage, and an old tobacco barn my grandfather hadn't used in years. My grandfather died when I was 14. After that, it was just my grandmother, and she started going to bed earlier and earlier. By the time I was 15, she'd be asleep by 7 most nights. I didn't mind. I'd do homework in the living room, watch TV and raid her kitchen. The quiet never bothered me. One evening in October, I was sitting on the couch working on an essay when I heard my grandmother call my name. Her bedroom was directly above the living room, and I could hear her voice coming down the stairs, but it sounded hollow. "Jacob, can you come up here for a minute?" I went upstairs and knocked on her door. She was asleep, sitting up slightly in bed, with her reading glasses still on and a book open on her lap. I took the glasses off, marked her page, and turned off the lamp. She didn't wake up. Back downstairs, I tried to keep working, but I kept thinking about the voice. It had sounded exactly like her, and I figured I must have imagined it, or she called out in her sleep. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. It was then I noticed the voice sounded distant, but she was old, and I thought maybe her throat was dry or something. "Jacob, I need you." I went up one more time. She was still asleep in the same position. I stood in the hallway for a while, listening. The house was silent except for the usual settling noises. I checked the other upstairs rooms anyway. There was no one else in the house, but the window in the guest room was wide open. I closed it, then went back downstairs and turned the TV on for some background noise. Around 8:30, I heard my name again, but this time it wasn't my grandmother's voice. It was my mother's voice, calling from outside. I felt uneasy because my mother was at work, and even if she wasn't, her car wasn't in the driveway. I stayed on the couch. The house was quiet again. Then I heard my grandfather's voice. "Boy, come help me with something." He'd been dead for over a year, yet the resemblance was uncanny. The slight rasp he had, the accent, even the drop in pitch when he said boy like it was something serious. I turned off the TV and sat there in complete silence. My hands were shaking. I kept staring at the front door, half expecting someone to walk through it. Nothing happened for maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard my own voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" It came from the garage. Hearing yourself speak when you know you didn't say anything is disturbing to say the least. I stayed on the couch, curled up under a blanket until 9:15, barely breathing and listening to the house. At one point, I heard my grandmother's voice again, then my father's, then my own, all coming from different places outside. The voices weren't saying anything specific, just my name or short phrases like, "Come here," or "I need help." They didn't sound urgent or scared, only normal, which somehow made it worse. When my parents' car pulled into the driveway, I practically ran outside, probably caught my mom off guard with the big hug I gave her. I didn't mention what happened because I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't go back to my grandmother's house for 3 days. When I finally did, I didn't hear anything unusual. A week passed, and then 2. I started to think I'd imagined the whole thing. Then it happened again, about a month later. This time I was in the kitchen making a sandwich around 7:30. My grandmother was already asleep upstairs. I heard my own voice coming from outside near the living room. "I'm going outside for a minute." I stopped mid-mayonnaise smear. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open and close. I didn't go into the living room. I stood in the kitchen, holding a butter knife, trying to decide what to do. After a few minutes, I looked around the corner. The front door was closed. I checked it anyway. Locked, same as I'd left it. I heard footsteps on the front porch. Slow footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. The door had a little window in it that had a cloth drape. Looking through it, I could make out the shape of a person, but I was too scared to pull it back and get a good look. Then I heard my mother's voice right outside the door. "Jacob, let me in. I forgot my key." My mother was at work. I'd talked to her on the phone 30 minutes earlier. The doorknob rattled slightly like someone was testing it. "Jacob, open the door." I backed away into the kitchen. The footsteps continued for another minute, then stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing else followed. I grabbed my backpack and jacket and went upstairs. I sat in the hallway outside my grandmother's room with the lights on until my parents arrived. When my dad came in and called my name, I made him come upstairs before I would answer. I told them I'd heard someone on the porch trying to get in. My dad checked outside with a flashlight and walked around the house. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been there at all. He suggested it might have been an animal or the wind, but I could tell he was taking it seriously because he checked all the windows and doors before we left. I stopped staying there after school. I told my parents I wanted to go to the library instead, or to a friend's house, anywhere but my grandmother's. They didn't push it. I think my mom could tell something had rattled me, even if I wasn't being specific about it. My grandmother moved to an assisted living place about 8 months later. The family sold the home to a developer who tore down the barn, and the garage, and eventually the house. It's a subdivision now, 6 or 7 houses where my grandparents' place used to be. I've never talked about this with anyone except my wife, and only after we'd been married for 2 years. She asked me once if I believed in ghosts or paranormal stuff, and I said I didn't know, but I told her what happened. She didn't seem skeptical, which I appreciated. She just asked if I ever figured out what it was, and I told her I hadn't. Sometimes I think about the people living in those houses now. I wonder if they've ever heard anything. But I drive past that subdivision sometimes when I'm visiting family, and I never stay long. I don't like being there after dark. I've been hunting the same tract of state land in northern Michigan for about 8 years. It's roughly 4,000 acres of mixed hardwood and pine, cut through with old logging roads that haven't been maintained in decades. I know it pretty well, or at least I thought I did. This was opening day of rifle season. I got to my usual spot about 2 hours before sunrise, which meant hiking in with just a headlamp. The trail I take runs along a ridge for about 1.5 miles before dropping down to where I set up. It's an easy walk. I've done it in the dark dozens of times. About halfway to my spot, I started getting this feeling. The kind you get when you just sense something's off but can't point to anything in particular. The woods were quiet, but not unusually so. There was nothing out of place in front of me. I stopped a few times to listen and didn't hear anything behind me either. Still, I kept looking over my shoulder more than normal. I made it to my stand and settled in. It was a ladder stand about 12 feet up, facing a natural funnel between 2 ridges where deer tend to move through. As it got lighter, I could see maybe 60 yards in most directions through the trees. The morning was a bust. Saw one doe way out of range, and heard something moving in the thick stuff to my north, but nothing I could get a shot at. By 10 o'clock, I was cold and ready to pack it in for a few hours. That's when I started noticing the smell. It's hard to describe. Kind of like wet dog, but worse, stronger. There was something rotten underneath it, like when you find a dead animal that's been decomposing for a while. I figured maybe there was a carcass nearby that I hadn't noticed before. Coyotes had probably taken down a deer, and I just happened to be downwind of it. I climbed down and started back the way I came. The smell faded pretty quickly once I got moving. I was about 20 minutes into my hike when I realized I was hearing my own footsteps echo. Except they weren't quite in sync with my steps. I'd stop, and there'd be one more crunch of leaves behind me, then silence. This happened 3 or 4 times. I told myself it was probably just delayed sound, maybe something falling from a tree, but I started walking faster anyway. When I hit the logging road that runs next to my trail, I made a snap decision to take a different route back to my truck. There's a longer way around that follows the road for about half a mile before cutting back through the woods. It adds maybe 20 minutes, but the road is open, and I'd be able to see anything coming. I didn't really think through why I was changing my route. I just knew I wanted to be somewhere with better visibility. The walk along the logging road was fine. It was almost noon by then, bright and clear. I saw some squirrels, heard a couple of ravens. Normal stuff. I was starting to feel stupid for getting worked up over nothing. Then I reached the cutoff where the trail heads back into the trees towards the parking lot. There were tracks in the soft dirt at the edge of the road. Fresh tracks. They were big, maybe 5 inches across, and they looked like dog prints, but not quite right. The toes were too long, and they were really deep. Like whatever made them was heavy. They were heading in the same direction I was going. The thing that bothered me was I'd hunted this area during turkey season in the spring, and there was a guy who told me about someone's dog getting loose up here. Big German shepherds or something like that. I'd seen their tracks before, and these looked similar enough that I convinced myself that's what they were. Some hunting dog that had gotten away from its owner and was roaming around. I followed the trail into the woods, and for the first 10 minutes everything was fine. Then I noticed the tracks had left the trail. They'd gone off to the right into the thicker stuff. I kept walking. 5 minutes later, I heard something off in the brush. I could see branches moving about 30 yards out, but the understory was too dense to see what was causing it. I unslung my rifle. I'm not proud of this, but I actually considered shooting in that direction. Not at anything, only a warning shot. I didn't, obviously. That's a good way to hurt somebody, or worse. Instead, I started talking, loud. Hey, get out of here. Go on. Like you would with a stray dog or coyote. The branches stopped moving, but I couldn't hear anything walking away. I kept going, moving a little faster now. My truck was maybe 15 minutes away. The trail here runs through a section where someone had logged about 10 years ago, so there's new growth and it's more open. I could see further. That's when I saw it standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 40 yards ahead. I'm not going to say what I think I saw, because I don't trust it. I was amped up, on edge, and I only looked at it for a few seconds before deciding I didn't care to find out more. It was tall, taller than a person. It was behind some saplings and I could make out some details, but not the whole thing. The head was too large, or the neck was too short. I couldn't tell which. The head did have the shape of a dog's, but with the trees in the way, it could have been branches and whatnot, making it look like it had ears. I didn't run. I backed up, keeping my rifle pointed in that direction, until I couldn't see it anymore because of the terrain. Then I turned and walked as fast as I could without actually running. I heard it following me, not trying to hide anymore, just crashing through the brush maybe 20 or 30 yards back. I was praying I wouldn't trip, that I wouldn't have to turn around and deal with whatever this was. When I broke out into the parking area, I ran the last 50 yards to my truck. I threw my rifle in the bed, jumped in and locked the doors. I sat there shaking for probably 5 minutes before I could even get the key in the ignition. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. The only other vehicle that had been there when I arrived, an older Bronco, was gone. I drove out of there and I haven't been back since. I filed a report with the DNR a week later about aggressive wildlife in the area, kept it pretty vague. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything back. My friend thinks I saw a bear and got spooked. Maybe he's right. I've seen bears before though, and I've never felt like that. My wife thinks the smell might have been a natural gas pocket from rotting vegetation. I don't know what it was, and I'm not saying I do. But I know how it felt, and that's enough for me to find somewhere else to hunt. I grew up in northwestern Washington, about 40 minutes outside of Bellingham. My dad worked for the Forest Service and our house was pretty isolated. The nearest neighbor was maybe 2 miles down the road. I'm talking real rural, the kind of place where you don't get cell service, and the power goes out if someone sneezes wrong. This happened when I was 16, summer of 2009. My dad had been assigned to survey some old logging roads that hadn't been maintained in years. They were checking which ones were worth keeping open, and which ones they'd let grow over. He'd gotten me a part-time job with him, because the pay was decent for what amounted to driving around in a truck all day, and I could use the money. The road we were checking that day was one we called Cascade Fork Road, though I doubt it had an official name. It split off from the main forest road and wound up into some seriously dense timber. We're talking old growth. Trees so thick that even at noon, it felt like dusk under the canopy. The road was in rough shape, potholes everywhere, branches scraping both sides of the truck. We had to stop 3 times to move fallen logs. We were about 6 miles in when we found the first print. My dad stopped to photograph some erosion damage, and I got out to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it in a patch of mud near a runoff stream. It looked like a footprint, but it was massive. Longer than my dad's boot by at least a size and a half, and weirdly wide. The toes were clearly defined. My dad came over and just stared at it. He crouched down and put his hand next to it for scale, and his hand looked like a child's in comparison. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he told me to get back in the truck. His voice had an edge to it I wasn't used to hearing. I don't know why he didn't take a picture. Maybe he just wanted to get out of there. We kept going up the road, but the vibe had changed. My dad wasn't making jokes anymore. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the door handle, like he was ready to bail out at any second. About a half-mile further, we found more prints crossing the road near another stream. They were heading uphill into the dense forest. The stride length between them was huge. I watched my dad pace it out over 5 feet. These ones weren't as defined. Maybe they were older. They looked more like vague impressions. He stood there in the middle of that old logging road, hands on his hips, just looking at these prints. Then he looked up into the tree line in the direction they were heading. I asked him what he thought made them, and he said he didn't know, but we were going to finish the survey and get out. His jaw was set in that way that meant the conversation was over. The road got worse as we climbed, more overgrown. The trees pressed in so close that the branches scraped both sides of the truck constantly. That's when we started smelling it. And at first, I thought maybe we'd driven past a dead elk, but it got stronger as we went. It was musky and thick enough you could almost taste it. My dad cracked his window and then immediately rolled it back up. He muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch. The smell got worse near a wide spot in the road where loggers had probably turned trucks around decades ago. My dad stopped the truck there and turned off the engine. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me to shut up and listen. We sat there in complete silence. The smell was so strong it was making my eyes water. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silent except for our breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. Then we heard it. Somewhere uphill from us, maybe 70 or 80 yards into the trees. Wood knocking against wood. 3 solid knocks, evenly spaced. A pause, then 2 more. It echoed through the trees in a way that made it hard to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. My dad's hand went to the ignition key, but he didn't turn it. We sat there, frozen, and then the knocks came again. Same pattern, 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. My dad started the truck and put it in reverse. He told me to keep my eyes on the tree line and tell him if I saw anything. His voice was steady, but I could see a vein pulsing in his temple. He started backing down the road, using the mirrors and craning his neck to see behind us. We couldn't turn around. The road was too narrow, and he said he wasn't stopping until we reached a wider section. We'd backed up maybe 200 yards when I saw it. Movement in the trees to our right, maybe 40 yards off the road. Something large stepped from behind a massive cedar trunk. It was only visible for a second or two before it moved behind another tree, but that was enough. It was tall, taller than any person, maybe 7 feet or more. Dark brown or black, covered in hair. The shoulders were really broad, and the arms too long. I told my dad, and he stopped the truck completely. He leaned forward and stared in the direction I was pointing, but whatever it was had moved behind the trees. We sat there for maybe 10 seconds, and then my dad saw it too. It stepped out from behind a different tree, closer to the road now, maybe 30 yards away. It was massive. The body was thick and powerful looking, covered in dark hair that seemed to catch what little light filtered through the canopy. I couldn't make out much of the face. It was too shadowed and far away, but I could see the head turn in our direction. My dad's hand was shaking on the gear shift. The thing took another step toward the road, and that's when my dad threw the truck into drive and just floored it, not caring about the branches scraping the paint or the potholes we were slamming through. He didn't try backing up anymore. He just whipped the wheel around and did a sloppy turn right there in the narrow road, the back end of the truck slipping into the brush. We got stuck for a second, wheels spinning, and I looked back and saw it was still there, standing at the tree line now, watching us. The tires caught and we lurched forward. My dad was driving faster than he should have on that terrible road. We hit holes hard enough to rattle my teeth. I kept looking back, but I couldn't see it anymore. The smell lingered for another quarter mile before it finally faded. We didn't talk at all on the drive back. When we finally hit the main forest road, my dad pulled over and simply sat there gripping the steering wheel. I asked him what that was, and he said he didn't know. I asked if we should report it, and he turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before. He said no. He said if we reported it, people would come looking, and we didn't want anyone going up there. That night, my dad told my mom the road was too damaged to maintain, and he'd recommend it be closed. He didn't mention anything else. I wanted to talk about what we'd seen, but he made it clear the subject was closed. The one time I brought it up, he cut me off and said some things are better left alone. The road got officially closed a month later. My dad retired 3 years after that, and we moved to Olympia. I don't know what we saw. Whatever it was, it's probably still there. I grew up in southern Louisiana, about 40 minutes outside of Yuma. My family's had a camp house out on the Bayou for 3 generations. Just a little wooden shack on stilts, with a dock and an aluminum boat. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. This happened back in 2019. My buddy Marcus and I had been planning a fishing trip for weeks. We both worked construction and had finally gotten the same weekend off, which almost never happens. The plan was to head out Friday night, do some night fishing for catfish, then spend Saturday working on the dock, which had some rotted boards that needed replacing. Marcus had been out to the camp a dozen times before. We'd been friends since high school, and he knew the area almost as well as I did. We got there around 7 in the evening, unloaded our gear, and spent some time getting the place opened up. The camp had been closed up for about a month, and had that musty smell old buildings get and the humidity. By the time we got the generator running and our stuff settled, it was close to 9. The sun sets late in July down there, but once it goes down, it gets dark fast under all those cypress trees. We headed out in the boat around 9:30. I knew a good spot about 15 minutes west, where the channel widened, and there was a sandbar that dropped off deep. The water was calm, and the air was thick. We could hear frogs and insects from what seemed like miles away, but our own voices sounded muffled and close. We'd been fishing maybe half an hour when we heard it. A woman's voice, calling out from somewhere in the darkness off to our left. It sounded like she was saying hello, asking if anyone was there. Marcus heard it first and turned his headlamp toward the sound, but there was nothing but black water in the silhouette of trees. The voice came again, and this time I heard it clearly. It was asking for help, said something about a boat. Marcus called out, asked where she was. The voice responded, but it was strange. The words were right, but the tone was off, like someone doing an impression of someone else. Flat in places where there should have been emotion. I told Marcus we should head back. Something felt wrong. He agreed, but as we were pulling up the lines, the voice came again. This time it sounded exactly like Marcus's sister. Called him by his childhood nickname that only family used. His sister lived in Baton Rouge, about 2 hours away. That's when I started the motor. I didn't ask or discuss it, just yanked the cord and got us moving. The voice followed us for a bit, changing as we went. It cycled through different people. An old man, a child, and back to the woman, but it stayed in the same location, roughly, which meant it wasn't actually following us. Only the sound was carrying. We made it back to the dock, and I've never moved faster tying up a boat. We got inside the camp and locked the door, which was stupid since the walls were thin wood, and the windows didn't even close all the way. But it felt necessary. We didn't talk much, just sat there with the lights on, drinking beers neither of us wanted, listening. Around midnight, we heard footsteps on the dock. Then someone tried the door handle, turned it back and forth a few times. Marcus had his hand on his fishing knife, and I had a tire iron I'd grabbed from the truck. The handle stopped moving and we heard the footsteps go back down the dock. Then, silence. Both of us were too scared to look out the window. Neither of us slept that night. We sat in that camp with every light on, taking turns making sure nothing got in. There wasn't anything else that night, but around 4 in the morning, we heard a boat motor in the distance. Someone else was out on the water. When the sun came up, I went out to check the dock. The boards we were supposed to replace were down at the far end, but I didn't make it that far. Halfway down, I found wet footprints. Barefoot, human-shaped but different. The toes were too long, and the spacing was off. They started at the edge of the dock, came up to the door, then went back down and just stopped. Didn't go into the water, they simply ended. Marcus came out and saw them too. We didn't talk about it. We packed up our gear in about 20 minutes and left. On the drive back, we saw a sheriff's boat heading the opposite direction, moving fast. I didn't hear about what happened until the next week. A guy had gone missing Friday night. He'd been fishing alone, and his boat was found drifting empty Sunday morning, about 3 miles from where we'd been. His tackle box and gear were still there. His phone was in his truck at the boat launch. They dragged the area but never found him. I went back to the camp one more time, about a month later, with my dad and 2 of my uncles. We replaced those dock boards and I haven't been back since. The part that bothers me most isn't the voice of the footprints. It's that someone went missing the night we were out there. I think about that a lot, about what would have happened if we had gone and checked on the voice.
You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Spoopy Cola.